are attempting to download it, and there's that pop-up window that asks, do you want to open this? Do you want to save this to a location? Do you want to save this? Selenium actually can't touch that. That's something that is out of the scope of Selenium's abilities. So what you're going to want to do is, if you see this part right here, pick a directory on your computer, somewhere in users, documents, somewhere where you will save files. What this option does is it tells Selenium, automatically download files, don't ask me. It tells the browser to not let that window pop up. If you don't set this, you will basically not be able to download things by clicking links in the way that we typically do. So you just need to edit this little bit right here and pick somewhere on your own computer to download it. After that, we will start the Chrome driver, and you should have a window, let me resize it, that looks like this. It's just a blank window. It says Chrome is being controlled by automated test software. This is a thing that websites can know when you access them. They typically don't check those, so that's pretty fine. But it's a thing to be aware of, that this is an integral part of the browser when you open it. And after that, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to run this code, driver.get google.com. That'll bring us to Google. Boop, just like that. Organize this real quick. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to try to inspect this and bring up the developer console. For me, I don't know how it works for you, but I actually can't find the first bar on the first click. So I'll just inspect it again to find the bar that we care about. So what we want to do here is we will find this, and we can just copy the CSS selector, and that gets us this first line of code where we define Google bar. Ooh. It has suddenly stopped working, even though it was working a couple minutes ago. Let me try this real quick. Curious. Let's do that and then see if it works. Interesting. I literally did this an hour ago and it was working. Okay. Is anybody not able to define the variable to find this search bar? Is it working for everybody? If it's not working, just say something. Okay, well, it sounds like it's working for everybody. So the next thing that we're going to do after we define that search bar is, let's see. So we are going to then try and send keys to this bar, because what we are trying to do here is we're trying to use Selenium to do a search. So you can do this by sending the keys so you define this variable Google bar that sort of stores this web element. And then if you type googlebar.send keys, that will just send the keys that you type. This is sort of what the code looks like right here. So anything that you type in here will then be sent to that web element. This will work with pretty much any web element, whether or not it's a search bar. You can send whatever keys you want to whatever web element. You can think of it like if you select a link, you can send an A key to that link. So if you run that code, that will very quickly just send, just for the sake of demonstration, I chose Best Office Chair Review 2020 because I was looking up office chair reviews due to working from home and sitting for so many hours a day. So to then actually search for this, there's a couple different ways. the way that we're going to do this first is by sending the enter key to the search bar. So to do that, you just type googlebar.send keys and then keys.enter. If you do that, it will somehow not be reached. That's weird. Let's see if this runs again. There we go. Okay, worked that time. So that's one way to do a sort of Google search. Very simple. You just send the enter key to it. But what I would like to show you is that you can also do this by clicking the Google search button. So we're going to hit driver.back to go back a page. One thing that's important here is that the first Google search where we found this web element, that is old. We need to do this again. Typically, when you refresh a page or navigate around a website, you're going to need to redefine your variables or find the web elements again, pretty much every time. Luckily, that's very easy to do. So we will, because that is a little wonky for some weird reason, we're going to redefine this button so that we find it again. And then what I wanted to show you is first, if you hit, so we define this as Google search button 1. If you send through Google search button 1.click, it will click on Google search. Wait, here we go. Here is the search button. For whatever reason, we have to redo this by CSS selector. Boop. There it goes. So if you click on that, you can see it highlights. It clicks, but there's nothing in the search box, so it doesn't actually search for anything. But I just wanted to show you that it works, and that's important for this next step. We will get the CSS selector again. Yeah. And now we will put our search term in, Best Office Share Review 2020. Then we're going to try and click that first button. What you'll find is if you try and click that search button that we just selected, Selenium actually can't find that. The element it was intercepted. And if you look at the page, you can kind of figure out why. So there's this drop-down window that has showed up. And the button that you're seeing right here, this Google search button, that's actually a different button. That is a different button in the HTML. So this is covering up that previous button. If you try to hit that first one, it won't actually go through. So what we then need to do is find this button. We inspect it, we get the CSS selector, very simple. Then we put it in our code. We can run that, and now we can click it. And that'll do our search. So there's a couple things that I wanted to show with this. One is, like I said before, you do this in largely the same way that you navigate web pages normally. You click on the search bar, you type in letters, then you hit enter, or you click on the search bar, you type in letters, you click Google search. This is a really normal way of interacting with websites. The second is that, so the idea of that being a new button is a little unintuitive at first, but it really makes sense. As we sort of start working with this, you will start to really see how websites are designed, how they're structured, and the way that you interact with them will start to be really intuitive and will really develop over time. And these sorts of things will become really, really simple and really obvious as you interact with it. Now that we have gone over that example, We're going to switch to something slightly more complicated. And we are going to move over to Reddit and see if we can web scrape their top trending topics. So we use driver.get and go over to the Reddit homepage. So here we see they're trending today, popular posts, all this stuff is starting to come up. So one thing that I want to show here is, so we want to get this top box where it just says trending today. We want to get all of the trending topics on Reddit. Currently, we can only see 3. If we get rid of the developer console, we can see 4. But let's just say that we're interested in figuring out what these are. So we will inspect the page. If you look at the HTML here, you'll see that these are actually in a box of their own. They're sort of in a container on this web page. And we can find this in the HTML. You can kind of see this because it's all highlighted like this. You go to the code, and you can see this pretty clearly. So this is in a div tag. Div means that there's just a divide in the code. It's just a new part of it. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to identify this container, and we're going to find the element of this particular container here. So we can do that by simply finding the CSS selector, which I have already done in the code. And we will run this and define it as trending today. What we're going to do now is we're going to look through the code that is saved within that particular variable. When you find this element and you define it as we just did, you can actually search through that. So what we're going to do is we're going to find all of the titles that are contained within this. So we're going to do that also a little differently by searching by XPath, which is very similar to CSS selector, but it's slightly different in sort of its mechanics, in that it starts to look through the HTML that we're seeing here. So we're going to find all of the elements within this trending posts container that are titles. We're going to find all of the titles here. So we are going to define the trending titles variable and find all of the things that are within a div tag that have a title. If we run this, we can see that there are 8. So there are actually 8 elements within this trending today container that have titles, which is a little weird. We can only see at max 4. So we're going to use a quick little loop and sort of figure out what's going on here. So I'll switch this over. And we are going to use this loop here to print out all of the titles that would be in this. So the first ones that we can see, Epstein and Bill Clinton flew together. So something about Bill Clinton and Epstein, a trending title on Pokemon Sword and Shield. So something like video games, a title about James Randi dying, something in Spanish, something about Pope Francis. And so there's more than 4, and importantly, they're actual titles of trending articles on Reddit. I don't know why this is set up this way. It could have something to do with a mobile app or location, something weird about the Reddit homepage. But the important part is we can actually see all of these. And also, the last one that I want to note is this :football:. That's a weird one. That's sort of coming out of nowhere. If we look at the page, there will be somewhere on here where there is an emote of a football. And I'm not entirely sure where, but for whatever reason, that's picking up something that we don't necessarily want. We can clean that up later if we want to scrape all of these. So we can find all of these trending topics fairly easily. This is not much code to write. There's a lot of comments here explaining it, but actual code-wise, this is really simple. You could do this, you could make this run every hour. You could make this run every 15 minutes. You could scrape all of this information very, very simply by running this code and then writing it to a data frame and saving it with all sorts of metadata and then putting it on a timer. It's very, very simple to do this. You could also sort of work through it, follow links. You can find links to all of these sort of like what the title is connected to. You could follow this to the original location within Reddit, scraped there, user information. All of these things can be automated fairly easily and fairly simply with Selenium and Python, and it's not actually all that hard to do. So that's sort of what I wanted to show with this, that you can access this stuff fairly simply. I want to stop for questions on some of this, if you have any, if there is any sort of clarification on some of these things that you would like, or if I was moving too fast.
Okay, this is probably going to be a stupid question, so I apologize. But
it will not be a stupid question. It's totally fine.
Where does this save to? So we're collecting this information. How are we getting it to save to somewhere?
So we're not actually saving this yet.
Okay, cool.
What you would do is, so in the way that I printed out all of these titles, you could save those to variables by pretty easily just writing them to somewhere in Python, to a data frame or some sort of spreadsheet format within Python. That would be very, very easy to do. And that's sort of how you would web scrape this. The downloading part will come next when we go to the archive. That's a little trickier in what we're doing and how we're accessing it. And I'll go a little bit slower because there's some extra things I'll have to talk about. But there's a lot of different ways to web scrape. And this is one of them, where you simply find things on the web page and then you record them as they are in the HTML. All right, any other questions about how this sort of works? Any questions about sort of finding the elements on the web page? I went a little quick, and it's sort of unfortunate that I can only show one screen at a time. So it's sort of hard to show the code running and the code as it's sort of displayed on the page. Is there anything you would like me to go back and touch on again on the Reddit part?
I have a question, but it's not, it's kind of partially related.
Sure.
Sometimes I see people say that you need to put like a header into your like scraping thing, like to I guess maybe to like trick the website into thinking that you're not like automating the scraping. Is that, I don't think that's in this code, but is that like, is that something you typically include, or like, is it like just to be safe, or if you're doing a lot of scraping, do you do it, or like when do you use that header?
So I've never actually had to do that. I've never run into a website that tries to really block me all that much. But I do know that people do that. And so that goes back to the thing that I mentioned at the start, that it's part of Selenium, that it communicates it's being automated. There are times when websites will shut you down based on that. Yeah, so all the code that I'm going over, Devin, is sort of in what I posted. But as far as the header goes, I've never had to use that. And I think that would be mostly useful for really specific instances where you think you will be blocked, or you will sort of get in hot water for what you're doing, in which case you really want to think about like, okay, what am I doing? Should I be scraping this? Should I not be? Sort of what's the utility of doing it in this way?
Just to follow up on that, Will, I've had to do scrapes where I've had to put those in, and the big reason, sometimes it's if you're scraping things that people don't want you to scrape, but oftentimes what it is websites that get a lot of queries, if you send too many queries in too quickly, you can shut down the website. And so they have automated blocks in so that if it gets pinged too quickly, then the website will automatically block your IP address. And you can actually find out what the ping length is. Every website has what's called a bots.txt file, and it's essentially a file that tells automated bots how quickly they can query, including like Google's crawlers. And so usually you can look up the bots.txt file and see how long the ping is that they require you to have as a minimum per requesting that site. And then it's usually pretty straightforward to implement into your script just with like a basic timeout function.
And so sort of on that topic, one of the things that we'll get into in a following workshop is the process of automating this and sort of code to help the automation process. And a big part of that is wait times, is sort of putting explicit and implicit waits into your code, what that means, why you put them there. One of the things that's nice about Selenium is that you can make it look like fairly closely how a person interacts with a web page. So by putting wait times into your code, you can make it look like instead of Python just inputting 40 letters at once, you can make it sort of look like somebody's typing by putting very short waits between letters. If you really, really need to do that. That can help with some stuff and with some sort of bot detection things where I've heard of things that are more detailed in terms of how scripts interact with websites. So we'll get into that in a sort of in another workshop. Any other questions about the Reddit example? Next, we'll move to the UNC archive example. Okay, so yeah, we'll move to the UNC archive. This is a little bit more complicated, again, than Reddit. The first thing that we'll do is we're going to define this variable called original window. What this is going to do is this is a variable that lets Selenium know what the first window we have open is. There are times when you will want to have multiple windows or multiple tabs open, and you have to be able to refer to specific ones. So it's always good to have a reference point for your sort of main browser window that you want to keep track of. But with that in mind, we're going to run this to get us to the UNC website and to access the library. So that'll bring us to this page right here. We are going to find this button, which is fairly simple. I'm going to pay more attention to the HTML here because it starts to be a little bit more important. So you'll see that this is an input tag with a type equals submit, name equals submit, value equal onion sign-in. So we find that in our code by XPath again. And I want to point out how this is structured. So we see that the way we structure this is it is an input tag with a value, onion sign-in. If we go back to the web page, you can see that right here. We are telling Selenium to find this element by the tag and this particular part of the HTML. This is a fairly easy and readable way to use to find elements. One of the bad parts about CSS selectors is they end up being very messy and very hard to read. If you are reading back over your code, it's almost impossible to figure out what that CSS selector is actually pointing to. One of the good parts about Selenium is that you have so many different options. You can pick this in particular. This is really easy to understand what it's pointing to, that there is an input tag with a value called onion sign-in. You can really easily figure out what this is referring to. So all we need to do here, we won't actually define it as a variable. You can just find it and then put .click at the end, and that will just immediately click on that button, bring us to this page. So there's going to be a couple parts of this. First, we're going to find this username input. We're just going to find it by ID this time. So we've done CSS selector, we've done XPath. You can also find things purely by ID. This is because many things in HTML have an ID. It's exactly the same as a value. It's just part of the HTML. Here is what we would do to find it. You inspect the element, you'll see that it has this part in the HTML just called ID. You can find a lot of elements using this. It's very simple, very easy to read. So we are going to define this onion username. We're going to find the element by ID. What you want to do with this part is to type this out. Don't put this in your code. Don't write your username or password in plain text in code. Just type it out in the interpreter. So for the password part, I will stop screen sharing so I don't share my password with all of you. But the username is public information, so I will do that. Make sure that you keep it within quotes. So if you just type that out with your username, send keys, we see that it just pops up right there. It's very simple. For the password, we can find it in the exact same way we did username. It has an ID just called password on this web page. If we inspect the element, pops up right here, input tag with an ID of password. It's very readable, very easy to find. So we will define this variable, onion password. I tried to make this easy to do. So what I did here is I defined a function where you can simply type in the function, and the send keys part will simply, you just use your password as the argument. So functions, I also did this because functions we use a lot in writing this type of code. You want a lot of your code to be written in terms of functions rather than how we are doing it here, because functions make it very easy to loop through web pages and do steps. Because a lot of this, remember, is you find something and then you execute a command on it in some sense. So what you really want to do typically is you put that within a function. So you simply run that function and you put that as a part of your loop. So what you want to do here is define this function, and then you can simply write send password, a password here, whatever yours is. Don't put it in plain text in your own code. If you send that, it'll just print it out immediately to the bar. So I'm going to stop screen sharing real quick. I'm going to put in my password.
I can make a comment here about that.
Sure.
So I know basically we're simulating a login. So like, it's obviously not best practice to have your username and password directly written on into your Python scripts for many reasons, like privacy related and whatnot. As you can imagine, we have a lot of this code up on GitHub, so hence it's probably not good for Will or I to have our passwords up online for everyone to see. So like so I guess there are a lot of ways to do this, but one way to do this is to have your like username and password information in like a text file that's on your computer somewhere, or like in some sort of like relatively secure location, and just have your script read that text file itself. That might be one way. Like there's a lot of ways to like do this without having to literally write in your username and password. That's one way that I've done, but we can get into that later. But that's just like on a security note.
Yeah, and so Todd is absolutely right about that. If you want to get really serious about it, what you do is you encrypt it too, is that you have a hashing program and you sort of encrypt your password and you encrypt your username, and then you use those, and through sort of Python modules, it decrypts it, and then it sort of then passes it through. That is best practices to do it very securely, because you really don't want usernames and passwords, especially paired together, saved in plain text on your computer, really anywhere. But I typed in my password, and we have found this by, so then we, next thing we do to actually log in, we just send the enter key to the password box. Like I said before, you can send any key you want. You can send tab, you can send enter, all of these things you just send to that box, and then logs you in. So we will wait a second. So this gets us to the Wall Street Journal, Eastern Edition. Next step that we want to do is we want to start like setting up our search. The reason that I'm showing you this is if you're interacting with archives, you often want to completely automate the process of downloading these articles. And that can involve logging out of the archive and logging back in because of certain settings. And it can help that process along and make it really reliable as opposed to getting shut out of the archive. So we have found this by CSS selector this time. And we are not using a variable to do this. We just find it with a CSS selector and then we click on it. And what we're clicking on is this advanced search link right here. So we run this code, clicks on the advanced search link, brings us to this page. So we are now at the advanced search within ProQuest, specifically in the ABI Inform collection. What you'll see here is it starts with the Wall Street Journal Eastern Edition already identified in that first box. It has the pub ID 10482. That's convenient, actually input that ourselves. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to start inputting our own search terms. So we want to put our search terms in this box. We find that, inspect it, and we see that it has the ID query term field _0. Fairly easy to do. Find element by ID, identify it there, and then we just send the keys through. I picked something pretty innocuous. I kept it on topic, office chairs. So this is just a string that's finding information about office chairs. This is the word office within 5 characters of the word chair, or I forget if it's characters or word. It's also looking for the string best office chair or greatest near the word chair. This is just finding things within the Wall Street Journal Eastern Edition that fit this search string. Very simple to pass that through to the second search field variable. And then finally, we want to hit search. This time we are hitting enter again. This is just a different format for hitting enter. There are many different ways to do things in Selenium. You can do it through send keys, keys.enter, or this. This is another way. There are rare times when that can be useful. Mostly I wanted to show you there's always many, many different ways to do things in this code. So we hit enter and we do our search. So we have 555 results and all sorts of things that we can click on to interact with here. So we'll go back to the code. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to resort these results. So the results as they currently are organized by relevance. We can see that over here. Having this sort of reorganizes the web page. For our purposes, we don't want them by relevance. We want them by sort of date, oldest first or newest first, whichever one we feel like. And that's just sort of easier to. So the way that we're going to do this is with another different way of identifying web elements. And we're going to do it by this thing called select visible text. So if we go back to this page and we inspect the element, I will drag this back over. Whoop. It's a little tricky with it disappearing on us. Okay. So if you inspect the element, we see it over here. And where is the part that we want? Cool. So this is the sort bar that we were looking for. And let's see if we can get down to the part. Okay. So if you see this thing right here, where it says value equals relevance, then there's this caret. You can see that this word is in a different font. It's between these carets. This is called visible text. You can also see that because if you click on the bar, we can see that. Sorted by relevance, sorted by oldest first, sorted by most recent first. We can select web elements based on the text that is visible to us as an end user. And that's what we're doing here. And we are going to select it by this oldest first. So we go back here. We defined that sort bar by the sort bar variable. And we're going to select it by oldest first. The second part that I want to talk about here is that we are enclosing this in select. If you remember what we did at the very start, we imported select from Selenium. This is a method to deal with drop-down menus. It has built-in tools to deal with them specifically. So we're going to use that to interact with this. And that's how we're able to use this code here that says select by visible text. It's part of that module. Selenium has a lot of options that you can import to deal with various different parts of web pages, different types of web elements, and this is one of them. So because we save it as select and then we find it by XPath, we can select the option of oldest first. And this lets us not even click it. It just picks it from that menu. Whoop. That first. And then select it oldest first. And that will just reorganize the web page to have all of the results organized with the oldest ones first. The next thing that we're going to do is if you look at this web page, it's organized with 1 to 20. So it only has 20 results showing at any point. If you look all the way down, you can see that there's an option for items per page. We really don't want to have to collect things 20 at a time if we can do them 100 at a time. It's a lot faster to do 100 at a time. So we will find that particular item. We can do it by items per page. We'll find it. It has the ID items per page. And so what we will do is we will again use select because it's a drop-down menu. So we will find it again, and then we will select by visible text again. You can see that, let's see here, if you open that up, it has option for 10, option for 20, 50, 100. Again, this is the visible text right here. So we can select based on that. And it's very easy to see just sort of in the drop-down menu that this is the visible text that you as the end user see. So we will find that and select it by visible text, 100, and that just reorganizes the page. So now we have 100 results per page. The next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to select all of the results on this page. It has this particular ID, MLCB all. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but it's very easy to find. So we find the element by ID, and then we click it. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to actually save our results, right? So now that we have them all selected, how do we do that? So we know that as a normal computer user, you click the all save options thing, and there's a menu that you go through. Using Selenium, we can do that too. It's very simple. So we inspect it. We find it right here. We can click on that. Fairly simple. You can just find it by CSS selector, which we do here. This is its CSS selector. Very easy. You can click that, and then we can click on it. That brings up this window here. Things actually get a little complicated here. So this is where sort of an idea of focus starts to sort of come in handy, and it's good to understand. When you're interacting with this, if you click on different parts of this window, it sort of activates them and deactivates other parts of the page. Think back to the original example with the Google page, that when you brought up the drop-down menu, when you type in words, the bottommost button you could no longer interact with, and the topmost button you could. Similar things can happen that are maybe a little less intuitive. So what we really want to do is we want to identify this Microsoft Excel format, just get a very easy XLS that has all of every single one of these, right? But if we are automating this, we can't actually find it by CSS selector. It's sort of out of focus for Selenium. But what we can identify it by, and this comes through some trial and error, is the visible text. I'm not entirely sure why, but if you look at this button, it is a teal colored circle and it has XLS in it. That's actually written in the HTML itself. That's not a JPG or a PNG. It's not a picture. This is actually just written in the web page. And luckily, it's a thing that we can select this particular element on. So, and you can do that by finding partial link text. So we will define this button with driver.findElement by partial link text, XLS. Just to reiterate that, you can see that right here. And that will actually find the button. Then we can very easily click on it. The next thing that we have to deal with is another window that pops up. We want to hit this deselect items when done, just because if we're looping through all of our results, we don't want to collect the same articles over and over. So we find this by just the normal method. Turns out the CSS selector actually works. That is already here. We run that, we click it. That is magically selected. The next thing that we want to do is if we scroll down, we want to actually hit continue so that we actually download these things. This is where that first option that we set in the Chrome options comes in handy. Normally, if you click this, a menu will come up that says, where do you want to save this? Do you want to just open it? And that's the thing that you can't interact with. Because we set that option, this will just automatically download to the location that you want on your computer. So we do that by, again, partial link text, because for whatever reason, with the way that this website is set up, we can't find it with CSS selector. It's out of focus. So we will click that, run that code, click it, and a tab will open, which we will now have to, where this is downloading to your computer now. All of those results are downloading normally. So we just have to wait for this to complete. As you see at the bottom of this page here, this is just an XLS that's saved in my computer. So we can keep going. Another part of focus that we have to talk about is, so while we see that this is open on this tab, the Selenium software is still actually focused on that first tab. If you close a tab, that first one will actually close. And what's important about this is that we then have to figure out how to close this second tab that's not actually useful because it's just handling the results. So we're going to get a list of every single tab that is open. And we do that with window handles. That's what this process is called with Selenium. So we define a variable called window handles that will get a list of all of them that are open. So if we get the length of this, we'll see that it's 2. There's 2 open, 1 and 2. There's just 2 tabs open that Selenium can see. So what we want to do is we want to close the second tab that's no longer useful for us. Importantly, Python indexes at 0. So the first tab that we see here is tab number 0. The second one is tab number 1. This is different than some other languages like R that start their lists at 1. So what we want to do is switch to window handle number 1, which is this useless tab, and then just run driver.close. This will close that tab. Just like that. Then we're going to want to switch back to the original window, which we defined at the start by just switching to with the window handles commands using switch to.window, the original window that we first defined. And so that will bring our focus back to where we want it to be. And then we can keep scraping as we need to. You can then, I think the last thing that we have in here is finding out how to go to the next page, which is this little caret here. So normally to go to the next page, you would either hit 2 or next. The 2 is a little worse for web scraping and loops because that will only ever get you to page 2. What you really want is something that's reliable that you can use over and over again. So you want to just hit next page. This is really easy to find, really easy to interact with. It's just a button. It has the title next page. So what you can do is find it with XPath. This is an A element, which is used for hyperlinks. If you see this right here, this is a hyperlink. It brings you to the next page, and it has the title next page. So we can find that with XPath really easily. So driver.find element by XPath, A tag with the title next page, and then we click it, and then we're off. This is then like really easy to loop through as many results as you want. And if you have 10,000 results, you can very quickly and easily go through all of them. So the particular code that we have here would be really reliable for that. It's all very generalizable to general buttons. You're not hitting 2, you're hitting next page. So we are just about at 4. Find this correctly. If there are any questions, feel free to ask. And I hope that this was a pretty clear demonstration of how Selenium interacts with web pages and how sort of intuitive and easy it can be, where you find an element and then you do the command on the element. Then you move to the next one. You find the next element, you do a command to it. Fundamentally, it's a very simple process. I will stop the screen share. All right. Any questions at all about this? Okay. Yeah, and I tried to set up this code with a lot of comments so that if you need to go back over it, it should be pretty clear. And there are very few things out there that deviate from this. And most things are identifiable by XPath, ID, or CSS selector. That's the vast majority of things.
Just to follow up on Micah's earlier question, this kind of scrape through ProQuest where you need a username to access it, that's the type of thing where you usually want to be proactive about figuring out how much data you can scrape. Because a lot of these data aggregators that require subscriptions, the only reason they make money is because they aggregate data. So if you start scraping everything they have, they get worried that you're trying to make a backup database and they'll crack down on it. And so I'm not sure about ProQuest specific policies, but when you're getting into those types of archival resources, you'll just want to be proactive about making sure you know what they allow and what they don't allow.
Mm-hmm.
So like if like they don't want another site basically just saying like, oh, we'll give you all the newspaper like archives and you can get it cheaper than ProQuest, but in reality all they're doing is scraping from ProQuest and then giving it to the users basically, and that's what
Yeah,
they want.
exactly. Some of them require you to sign specific contracts or pay licensing fees to get access to large data or to scrape their website. Others don't, but you know, it's just a matter of figuring out what they want to do.
Right.
So with ProQuest specifically, sometimes they'll throw up things like CAPTCHAs at you as you're scraping, where you will have to put in, you know, the CAPTCHA answer to keep going. The standard way of dealing with that is to just restart your loop and keep track of where you are in the loop. So you only do like 6 passes through, then you restart, and then you go to number 7. You sort of keep track of where you are. And that's sort of a very standard way of doing it, where you just sort of avoid their automation. For ProQuest specifically, I think some of us have gotten sort of queries from the library of like, hey, are you legitimate? What are you doing here? And then you just have to say, this is for, you know, research and I'm not just stealing all of the stuff on ProQuest. Then they leave you alone. Other archives might just ban you. That's happened to me. But luckily there's like 3 or 4 options and then you just sort of switch to a next one. They don't even contact you. They just say, go away. And then you're like, okay, you don't want me to do this, so I won't do this.
Yeah, I guess also on that note, I guess like I've had websites, like other websites, that notice that the Selenium browser that I'm using is a Selenium browser. So I think when you open up Selenium, you could set what I think you could set what user agent it is. Automatically, it's like clearly it's like a Python sort of user agent or something like that. I don't know the list of strings, but basically a list of strings that tells the website what I think what user agent it is. And so you could generally like just you open up a Mozilla Firefox or a Chrome user agent, and all those like strings you could find up online and use. It's just like setting when you open up your Chrome driver, you just say open up with this user agent and whatnot. So it's a lot of weird ways that websites try and detect what's going on for good reason. And with the ProQuest, yeah, they do email you if they find weird activities going on. I've had that happen to me. I just say this is legitimate research, back off generally. I think ProQuest seems to be pretty hands off I think Access World News or Newsbank cracks down on you really hard and sends you really angry emails saying, don't do this.
Yeah, I've had trouble with Newsbank.
Me too.
Yeah, which sucks because they have a great historical archive. So it is what it is.
Yeah. The sort of last thing about that is you want to keep in mind what types of sites you're scraping on and how you deal with the problem. So if you're scraping from ProQuest, right, they're not going to have any problems with increased activity. You probably don't even create even a small blip in the amount of traffic they have. If you are scraping from a small mom and pop website that's really low budget and could be really hurt by bandwidth costs, you really don't want to scrape too much from them because you could just shut down their website alone. Just from downloading all the information on them, on their sort of servers, and really interacting with them a lot. You don't want to be a jerk to like the really small ones. ProQuest is fine. Amazon, if you scrape like Amazon sales data, they don't even know you exist, and you're less than a rounding error in their server costs. But I don't know, grandpa's cheese barn.com or something is going to get really hurt by like your traffic. And it's a thing to really keep in mind to not screw them over because it could cost them a lot depending on their host.
So I think that's it. So I guess in the next 2 weeks we'll be moving on to like what it's either the second to last web scraping session. I forgot what I'll be going over, but I'll be going over something.
Yeah, I think we'll be going over like weights and ways to start putting this into an automated framework, if I remember right. I looked at it last week.
Yeah.
And
cool. We'll be doing that then. All right. So have a good weekend, everyone. Take care.
Ciao.